All right. So my next question to you is, what is something that a non-academic, what is something non-academic that your PhD has taught you?
Yeah, I think that from when I started, and maybe people going in more maturely to this process might already have learned these things, but I learned a lot about like the trade-offs just generally, and when you think of things in a complex way, you realize like the things that you're gaining but also losing from different situations. So even in the advantages and disadvantages we just talked about, it's like, okay, you gain flexibility and learning, but you might trade off standard achievements and milestones in your life. Like there's a lot that you learn about those pros and cons in the work that you're doing, in the fact that in a given study, the people who designed and ran it did some things well, but that was at the expense of something else. Like they're more internally consistent and the causality was good, but it's not as externally valid. And there's, one extra hour you could be spending on this project is one less you can spend on something else. So that applies, I think, to everything. And now when people ask me, oh, is this, ultimately bad, or should I do this, or should I do this? I say, well, what are the trade-offs of your two decisions? If you're at a crossroads of your career or something else, it's like helped me to make decisions by considering what is the counterfactual to that on the other side. And that's like not just non-academic, I think it just kind of covers everything in the regards that it's made me be a lot more nuanced about some things that before maybe I'd say, you should always do a PhD, or you should never do a PhD. You should always, do this kind of job. And now it's like, okay, well, if you want to do it, what are you going to lose and what are you going to gain? And you have to make that kind of decision on the risks and the investment and kind of return that you're going to get in a way.
That's a very interesting approach. In fact, I think this is one takeaway that I will definitely take from this interview, because decision making is always so difficult for us. It's not just about deciding if you want to do a PhD or not, even for buying shoes or buying a top. It's just so hard sometimes. So I think it's a very important point and a very interesting approach to consider in daily life as well. So yeah, measuring trade-offs.
Yeah, you definitely don't always have time to do it all in so much detail, but it is good to think about even just always considering the opposite. Like what people do, what's called a pre-mortem, and they're like, oh, I'm going to consider what could go wrong. So this is what we want to do, but these are all the barriers we might have to worry about. And it just helps you to make better decisions because you're kind of considering the alternative.
Okay, thanks. That's a very good point here and approach. And so who should do a PhD?
So anyone who wants to sort of create new knowledge and spend this flexible time learning new things, being really dedicated, these years to learning and generating knowledge, I would say, should do it. And if you want to be challenged, alongside that learning at the highest level, then that would be a good motivation. But it's definitely, when I say not for everyone, I don't mean that some people are sort of good to do this and some people are not good enough to do this. All I usually mean when I tell folks you don't have to go down this route, or it's not right for you, is just that the trade-offs wouldn't make sense, or it's not enough of an importance. When you rank those different things, you can learn and be challenged in many other areas, and the learning can happen elsewhere. But when I tell people who don't want to create this new knowledge through research but still want to do a PhD, I go, remember that you can learn in any job that you have, in any role that you can be going above and beyond to develop a new solution of how to do something in a company, or in a government. If you're working in, a nonprofit or a public sector organization, there's learning to be done, there's creating to be done, there's challenge, but it's just not necessarily creating new knowledge, learning as your exclusive goal and being challenged at that really difficult theoretical level. So those would be the distinctions I would say between, who should do one and for whom it won't be as important for their goals. So it's always does it help you reach your goals? If those are your goals, then, that would be the most helpful thing. If the goals are research and, learning and theoretical challenge.
Yeah. So it's all about knowing what you want to do before by itself, and the motivation of it.
Yeah,
And
it takes time.
Yeah, that definitely takes time, and also some time for your own self to realize what you want to do. Because recently in the episode 2, I was discussing this with another PhD student, and he said pretty much the same thing. So it's a very much of an overlap between what we think as current PhD students about this thing, and also the fact that you mentioned about the awareness of like there is learning possibility in every sector, so we don't have to have a specific route that our friend is following or our relatives have followed. So this is another very interesting and important point to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, people think when they leave school, they're just like not learning. So I should stay in school so I can learn. And it's like, yes, you do a lot of it there, but
Yeah.
I think we have to move away from work
Mm.
being just really routine, mundane, and really just not using any of your skills.
Mm.
Part of that is to raise the kind of opportunities that we give people in their jobs to use the kind of skills that they already have. But the other is to look at a work opportunity as a learning opportunity. Having that focus on learning can actually be really helpful for even performance. And that's some work that I've also been researching, is like when people focus on performing well versus learning a lot versus like being afraid to fail, it's really different in terms of how you end up performing. And so focusing on performance, either not failing or winning, is not always going to be as helpful as having a learning focus and saying, what can I get from the failures? What can I actually benefit from what I did? And you'll actually end up being a bit more well adjusted as well, able to deal with those setbacks. Whereas if it's all about winning and losing and failing and being afraid of failing, then it's really possible that you lose sight of it.
Yeah.
So even in a workplace, yeah, you can take that learning focus and that can be your goal. And you could end up as a byproduct doing much better than you would otherwise if you had a different kind of focus that you were entering that job with.
That's very important, because then in that case, success comes as a byproduct rather than you forcing it to be the end product. And then I think there's so much more to take away, because once we succeed in one particular goal, that's over there. So what comes next? And if we have this learning mindset, then we keep on learning and there's no end. So we are never like, feeling depressed or bored that, now we are done with this and now what next? So yeah.
Yeah, it brings like a humility too, like to know that you don't know and then you're comfortable saying that you don't know,
Yeah.
but let's find
Right.
out. And there's definitely we're lacking a bit of that in more of like the business world, and the applied world could kind of take some of those insights and use them, like you said, focusing on success as the byproduct, because when we have those metrics too that we focus on that are success metrics, how do we increase those? We can end up losing sight of the main goal, because we'll actually get there in like an unethical way or in a less productive way or less sustainable way than if we focus on doing the process properly to lead to success, as opposed to just shortcut to success directly.
Yeah. And I mean, just want to add on here, because this is such an interesting point of discussion, that it's not just about, getting the product at the end of it. I think it's also enjoying the journey, because that's what matters. And even for us as PhD students, it's not about like when we get the degree, it's not just about that moment, because possibly we will not be like, that excited for that day, but it's more about in the process, what we are learning, how many people we're meeting, what we are interacting with them, and what we are learning from them. So yeah, I think
Yeah, I want the journey to be worth it, and it's sad that it's not for a lot of folks, like in academia and like in their PhD. So we have to try, if we can control it, to make that a better experience for us, because we're the ones ultimately who, are going to focus on us first. Whereas, you'll think your advisor should make this a good experience. Yeah, but if they don't, like, it'll fall down to us as the responsibility at the end of the day anyways, right?
Yeah, just an add-on question here, because I really liked the discussion that we just had. So, are these learning, abilities, the learning mindset, is it taught? I mean, can it be considered as a skill? Because not everybody is initially that much motivated. Also, depending on what environment they are raised in. So, like if we can bring it to schools and teach this to kids, then by the time they are ready to take over different professions, they will find it very easy to adapt.
Yeah, there have been some studies that actually try to intervene on what they take those kind of concepts and turn it into like a growth mindset in a fixed mindset. So you may have heard of a little bit of that work. There hasn't been a lot of success when looking to replicate it with large samples, the impact of the intervention of the mindsets. However, it's definitely something that you could do in a collaborative environment, and we can kind of, set as a team, like what are those goals as a team. So even though, like you said, people might intend to have a certain focus, and a lot of their background experiences might drive them to, tend to look at things a certain way, like a worry about failure or a focus on winning or a focus on, learning and just kind of gaining knowledge from a situation. As a team, what we can do is try and kind of set those norms and expectations together. Or with your leader, you can say, like, let's talk about this feedback. Like, how do we want to proceed? And what do we want to focus on until the next time that we talk? And so there's ways that maybe people's innate tendency to focus on the different ones could be realigned a little bit with their team, their leader, like the overall kind of goal of the program. Maybe when you come into orientation, we talk about this is a place of learning. We are all trying to learn. The focus will be on you like coming out of here, and success will look like you had learned things you didn't already know and you're able to use them, as opposed to your dissertation turned into this many papers and was cited all the time. Like, that's a different way of thinking about success as your own goal of like, how should I behave to reach that success? So they're great questions. And unfortunately, those interventions like so far haven't worked too well, but I think what you can do is create a more welcoming environment, a more comfortable environment where it's safe to speak up and you have that psychological safety, something that Google did a lot of really interesting projects on. And so that could really help create a focus on learning. And that psychological safety does help kind of increase learning on teams and stuff like that. So there's ways we can indirectly do that. And the growth mindset stuff, it's been very popular, but in terms of replicability, they've just had some trouble with it. So I think there's ways we can get to the same end, but we might have to go a little bit detour. And always being like compassionate with yourself, right? If we're talking about this as a personal thing, it's like, even if you're focused on winning, it's like, well, when you don't win, if you're compassionate with yourself about what did you learn and reflect on that experience, then maybe you can have that focus on learning like afterwards as you look backwards. And next time you'll be a little bit focused, not just on winning, but what did I, learn from this experience, and how can I use that in case I fail to kind of like get more out of it.
Yeah, that's a very good point there. Yeah, self-compassion is always helpful because sometimes we like punish ourselves more than
anyone else.
Anyone else. And also like we behave very well with others, but when it comes to our own selves, we don't do that. So yeah, we often forget that, but this is one thing that we should remember. Yeah. All right. So now this is, now that we are talking about self-compassion, the next question is about what is your take on mental health and PhD?
Yeah, so I think we can see that this being a big thing for both of us kind of gives you an example of it lacking in the PhD experience. So it can be really hard for your mental health. I don't think it has to be that way for a PhD to be so negative to your mental health, but I think that some setups, some, ways that labs are run, some types of research can just take more of a toll than others. If you are doing some work like my colleagues used to do, and you got to go into the lab at 3 a.m. because the yeast is on a 12-hour cycle, and there's like nothing you can do about it, like that's going to have an impact because sleep and your schedule, your eating and your sleeping and your kind of exercise are going to have a huge impact on your mental health. So some ways that the PhD is set up are going to have those impacts. But what you can do to learn about the lab, what research kind of looks like, what you can expect, what your advisor's style is, like it can help you to have those expectations calibrated to what you are expecting, and make sure that you know what you're getting into before and say, do I want to go into this specifically? So that could be something to help like get a better handle on the things to expect in your specific field, because it'll vary across fields. But also, even if all that goes right, it's still, like we said, a guilt-ridden process. There's isolation involved, like there's all these kind of risk factors. And so if you have, through your school, like a lot of schools are developing opportunities to build skills like healthy communication, mindfulness, setting boundaries, resistance, like if you have counseling services and stuff, there's so much that you could do even before you run into an issue to do like preventative mental health maintenance. You know,
Right.
just like we go to for a checkup, it's kind of like, how do I build these skills before I'm going to need them, before I go into a crisis mode? And of course, being okay with and open about the role that, you know, therapy and counseling can help all of us. Like, it'll just help you not have that stigma against yourself, because you said we can be very self-punishing.
Yeah.
And really just look at it as like an investment in your own well-being and your ability to, you know, be finished faster. Let's say we were able to manage, you know, our anxiety around the PhD. Maybe that would actually let us finish half a year before, because it would help you to kind of deal with all the things that end up, you know, leading you to procrastinate, leading you to kind of avoid meeting with, you know, your advisor when something's going wrong. That can specifically be tied to our mental well-being and the habits that we've kind of learned. And so if we could prevent those before, what would it be worth to you to save like 6 months of this time, right? It would be really valuable. And so if we think of it more as preventative and more as something that we can all benefit from, I think that would really change the mental health conversation around the PhD. And it would be, you know, taking back some of that control for things we can control, recognizing that there's some of it that'll always get us down, and it's just going to be how we respond.
Yeah. You have some very interesting insights there. I mean, I really love the concept of this preventive. I mean, how what do you call it? I mean,
yeah, like preventative mental health or like well-being.
Yeah.
It's just like a checkup for your mind as opposed to your body, right?
I mean, I personally practice meditation, and I am a trainer as well, a certified one. So I think it really helps. It does really help. And it's not just about meditation, but anything that if you're interested in sports or anything that just relaxes you, could be just really helpful. So don't, I mean, leave that during PhD. That should be, in fact, priority during PhD.
Yeah, and like if you think of it in a way by connecting it to those benefits it can give you, that is definitely a way to help and make it comfortable for everyone to invest in these things for themselves, because you're like, what can I, you know, do to not maybe need to recover so much from the degree after. That's something that a lot of my colleagues go through. It's like a whole decompression process after you're done. And you want to like go into the next thing. People like, I want to get, you know, get into my next opportunity. I want to enter and hit the ground running, but I have to deal with all of this you know, processed frustration or, you know, guilt and shame coming out of the PhD. You actually could, if you again did some prevention, right, in the vein of what you're saying, in the vein of mindfulness, you know, exercise, good health, eating well, like having enough sleep, maybe you could bounce back quicker from that. Maybe you could, you know, run into the next experience more quickly and with more, you know, energy basically to do that, as opposed to having to kind of unpack everything that happens towards the end of the degree, because we know there's like so many stages where people are criticizing you have to defend yourself. Like it doesn't always end on the most celebratory.
Yeah. I really see this psychologist coming out from you because I mean, this is just about conditioning, right? Because if you are throughout your PhD conditioning yourself to be, you know, stressful and everything, and then suddenly you have to uncondition yourself, you really don't know how long that will take, and habit formation. So this is like so important.
It's definitely about habits, yeah. And it's funny because I'm not really like, I've never done much in the kind of clinical psychology and like mental health brain, but I do a lot of work on like habit building and behavior change. And when you get into routine with a certain context, even with certain people, like the people are your context, like your advisor, you kind of just settle into a way that you tend to communicate, a way that you tend to kind of like approach that relationship, and those habits can get really strong because you keep doing them every time. So if every time I like tend not to message my advisor when I should be, it's like I'm kind of teaching myself, right, to be falling into that habit. So yeah, habits are really like harder to break. It's helpful to just like set good ones from the beginning, but if you have to, you got to really remind yourself every day to like unlearn and then relearn the new good things that you want.
True. All right. And so now we are talking about habits and everything. So how does your PhD work affect your private life?
So it definitely spills over. And I've tried to minimize that over those 4 years that I've been in the program. Before, when my partner and I were both in graduate school and our masters, it's like you would work until 12 because like you're young and you don't have anything else to do and you have all this time and you're both kind of dealing with the stressful situation. So it definitely sort of was a bigger part of the rest of my life than I've been trying to do now. And now that my partner has like more of a standard 9 to 5 job, I'll try to like walk in the morning as if I have a commute. You know, I try to like work with those regular hours and like detach afterwards. I have a bit more of a private life. And so I'm trying to like accept those trade-offs, accept the things that I like can't do. You know, you go in think I'm going to get this many papers published in this time, and it never really happens that you get as many done maybe as you think you would. And it's just something I'm trying to like leave work at work in a way and have a private life outside of that by like really setting those kind of boundaries. But at the beginning, that was not the case at all. And even for the first few years, I would say it didn't go very well like that because you feel that obligation.
Yeah, and it takes time to understand that, you know, how much of it is affecting you, and then seeing that in your behavior, and also maybe sometimes when we don't see, the others tell us, you know, that you maybe take a step back and think about other things in life too. All right. And so what is, this is the last question of the interview. So what is one message that you want to share with people who are watching this video?
Yeah, for sure. If you love research and you want to have like dedicated time to just learn and develop and have this flexibility to kind of study whatever you want within a given period of time, then you should consider a PhD. But like we were talking about, learning happens everywhere. And so if you keep that goal to learn and grow wherever you're going, you're going to benefit from, you know, that continuous lifelong learning that doesn't require a specific kind of degree.
True. That is a very important message here. So folks, I mean, I hope you enjoyed it. And thanks, Natasha, for sharing all the insights and like being so frank about all your experiences and with everything. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.